Just wanted to say a few words ahead of this video because these videos come off the back of a huge lot of Eaglemoss Star Trek ships that I picked up recently. And so I've put up all the duplicates on eBay for you to have a look at, and I'll include links around and about the place. So if you've got any sort of interest in getting hold of a few of these to have a look at them for yourself, you can do so for a while at least, because it looks like they're not going to go flying off the shelves. I've tried to price them quite reasonably, so do please go and have a look. And without further ado, I will get on with the main video. Cheers. So here we have the USS Vengeance from Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan. Star Trek Into Darkness. Yes, now. I mean, this ship, when it first shows up on screen, quite literally has a real impact, because we have never seen a Federation starship quite like this before. I mean, the nearest analogy really is something like the USS Defiant, because that was a dedicated warship. It was designed to fight the Borg and do nothing else. One thing I will immediately say about the Vengeance is, I don't understand why a ship that is designed for single pilot use through automation, potentially, is so enormous. Now, it may be that we don't see why it's so big, because it doesn't actually do a huge amount in the film in terms of unconventional weaponry. But you do kind of wonder why it makes itself quite such a large target when it's supposed to be a big old warship and it's supposed to be stealthy. Because apparently one of the things that I hadn't really picked up on in the film, although I remember Sulu saying on the bridge that he's picking up readings that he doesn't understand, is that it was designed to sort of, reflect scanners, not to a cloaking device kind of level, but to a level that is not normal for a Federation starship. But you'll see that the design iterations it went through, it's not dissimilar to the bird of prey atmospheric fighter that I looked at just yesterday, really. From my point of view anyway. So as you can see, class dreadnoughts built around Jupiter in a station around Io, launched 2259, Section 31. Again, I'd kind of forgotten that it was Section 31 was such a big part of that film, because it has a distinct lineage really from sort of Deep Space Nine time onwards. It was introduced as a concept. The idea that there's this sort of shadowy organisation kind of within Starfleet that's out to protect the Federation at all costs, and it doesn't really play nicely. So it's just the equivalent of the Tal Shiar and the Obsidian Order in the Cardassian Empire. So fair enough, I get it. But it's kind of we just hadn't really sort of heard of them in the main. In the Kelvin universe before now. Got phaser drones, which we'll come to, and photon torpedoes. And actually, it's got more than that, because it seems they mentioned railguns in here as well. And I do remember it having cannons that kind of deploy down out of it, which I think Scotty's intervention kills off in the nick of time, probably. So immediately we get into this sort of there's a general sort of introduction here about the whys and the wherefores of this vessel. That basically Section 31 felt a conflict with the Klingons was inevitable, and they were going to need more ships like this that were out and out combat ships rather than being nice, shiny, friendly exploratory vessels. And that sort of that inverse of friendliness is basically what drove the design thinking. Basically, it's got to be the antithesis of the Enterprise. Everything the Enterprise is, this isn't. This has got to be bigger, faster, meaner, nastier, basically. That was the whole sort of design ethic. And you see, to my mind, I don't know whether they did it the right way round, because what seems to be happening these days, because they can do so much so quickly with CG, they are able to sort of do stuff and prototype stuff really, really quickly, rather than just kind of kit bashing as a way to explore designs. So this page, you see, is what sort of really kind of puzzles me in a sense, is that you have this incredible array of really sort of out there designs. I mean, don't know what's going on here. It's like the Swiss cheese starship, you know. That obviously is much more enterprisey. That looks like it's been designed at the same sort of time as the Enterprise, but to be sort of beefed up a bit. And of course, in the end, they did go back to that. But apparently, for months and months and weeks, it had this sort of more of this kind of idea, but a gap in the front of the saucer section, so sort of, you know, a main weapon could fire out of it or whatever. And it was only when J.J. Abrams looked at it and he basically said, no, close it off, it's got to look like a Federation ship. That they actually did that, but they kept this idea of negative space. And when I saw this for the first time, and in fact, I think when I got, I think it was like a Hot Wheels model I just happened to pick up randomly when I was in a toy store with my son, and sort of I picked it up and I thought, I didn't really notice that in the film at all. Because the thing is, the ship is black, and it's largely filmed against a black background. And they were saying that the only way they could actually make it seen is via its reflections. So it's the amount of ambient light that sort of comes off it that really lets you know that it's there. And they actually looked at things like sort of the heat tiles on the USS Discovery and the space shuttle to actually be able to sort of give a sort of a texture for the mapping and so on, the specularity that actually made it work. So they were kind of looking at how, you know, sort of stealth fighters and so on were coated as well to try and make it look realistic. And they also went for designs that would kind of reflect sensors away. So, you know, if you aim a beam at it and it gets diffracted or sort of bounced away or just absorbed, and that's fairly standard in stealth methodologies. Now, in space, of course, you're talking about very different distances and a very different environment to atmospheric stealth. So you've just got to try and kind of keep everything hidden from the enemy as much as you can. But, you know, if you are generating a huge amount of power, some of that power has got to generate waste heat. So you've got to put that somewhere as well. So I'm not quite sure how it would have all worked. But apparently this design here was quite a long way along. This is the one with the gap in the front. And it was only really scrapped at the last minute. So they were even mocking up battle images of how it would engage with the Enterprise. So, you know, they were trying quite hard with that one. They were also going to do a huge bridge. But again, that just got swapped out for a fairly standard bridge layout in the end. And again, that does make sense because, you know, you wouldn't deviate that far from the standard Federation designs because people would be familiar with that from a training point of view, albeit this was designed by genetic augment, you know, there is that, but nevertheless, he's only got human-sized arms and legs as well, so, you know, why would you go that far afield, really? But, I mean, you know, the thing was impressive on screen. I mean, the shots when it's actually, you know, taking chunks out of the Enterprise at warp is pretty painful to watch because the Enterprise is just getting hull breaches left, right and centre, nothing it can do about it. And it's got all of these sort of weapon pods alongside the navigational deflector. And I love the way that the navigational deflector closed up once it was back at impulse to sort of either shield it or apparently, according to this, to make it stealthier somehow. But, you know, okay. But, you know, it is sort of fascinating the fact they went for a really dark ship. And I think like Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy here, you know, it's a really, really black ship. And it's like, so how do you see it in space? So if you have a background that's well lit, obviously you can see it in silhouette, and that kind of works. But otherwise, if you're just in plain old space, it would be quite hard to spot because that is part of the point. And they actually modelled it off these sort of fast, old school Italian cars, so it's kind of all angles. It's all sort of refractive surfaces and angles and just not smooth in the way that the Enterprise often is because they want to confuse sensors. So I like the thinking that went into it, but I'm just not sure which way round the thinking was. You see, I'm a Star Trek The Next Generation technical manual kind of guy. I like nice detailed, albeit fictional, explanations to back up why a particular design was picked. And I'm not sure whether or not there is actually a design explanation for these negative spaces beyond the fact they look cool. Now, you know, I'm all for cool looking spaceships, don't get me wrong, but if you're in the Star Trek universe, I just feel that you need to have more hard science backing it up. And they were saying about sort of firing phasers at warp when and then they get bent for some reason, and then as a joke they kept that as a thing. And I thought, well, but it's Star Trek. It's not supposed to be jokey. It's supposed to be relatively hard science fiction. So, I question, I suppose, the way in which they kind of approached it if they weren't approaching it in a typical Star Trek way. And I think back to Into Darkness, and I think, yeah, it's a great action film. Is it a Star Trek film? I don't know. I mean, yes, I jokingly refer to it as Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan for very obvious reasons. And it does have that sort of feel to it. But then, I just don't know. I don't know how other people feel about the Kelvin Universe films. I think sometimes they hit the right note, sometimes they don't. And the problem is they're playing in a very, very different cinematic marketplace now, I suppose. Don't get me wrong, the acting, Benedict Cumberbatch was properly terrifying as Khan. It's actually quite disturbing to watch him in places, because it was a great performance. But I just don't know whether it's still Trek as such. But anyway, I digress, because this is about The Vengeance, which incidentally doesn't have an NCC number, because it was unmarked. So we know it's The Vengeance, but nobody else was supposed to know it was The Vengeance, even though it's gratuitously and obviously a Federation-style starship that no one else was likely to have built. Apparently, the fact that it doesn't have NCC on the hull is going to fool everybody. Yeah. Anyway, so let's have these phaser drones. Apparently, we do see them, but they're never really sort of name-called in the film. And in fact, apparently ILM, when they got hold of the model from the in-house department, would have gone crazy with it and had put all sorts of extra weaponry into it that we just never see. Because there's a comment in here about the film isn't about the Vengeance, the film is about the film. It's kind of, so you don't get it shown off as much as people like me might have liked to have seen it shown off. But, we've got various sort of, the drones would have come out of here, I think, and obviously it's got these sort of phaser cannons, for want of a better description, that can knock another ship out of warp at warp, which is useful. Photon torpedoes, as you would expect from any ship this sort of size, but also I guess railguns are mentioned here. It was even going to fire sort of solid projectiles, which is an interesting idea in space, because very, very difficult to achieve that when you're flying around in 3 dimensions relative to each other. But I guess if the other ship were just sort of stopped relative to you, the idea was that they would fire kind of disc sort of weapons, which would be able to just ignore shields effectively, because they're solid, they're not energy based, and shields are primarily designed to stop energy and maybe small particles of matter, but not sort of great big chunks of matter. So interesting idea. Obviously, this is San Fran getting smashed into, because that was always on the cards for it as a sort of climax sequence. Or obviously, it didn't work out quite as Khan had intended or aimed for. And that's the sort of comparison scale with the Enterprise. And it does dwarf it completely. It's quite interesting. There were various different lengths that they could have gone for, but I think anything beyond what it was shown as would have been completely ridiculous, because its crew complement at maximum would have been enormous, So I like the fact that they reined it in a bit, because the other thing you've got to remember about this is that fundamentally, it shouldn't be able to do that much more than the Enterprise can, because it's still using the same basic technology. I'm sure Section 31 has some, Black Ops-y sort of stuff that they had access to that others didn't, perhaps. But fundamentally, you're in the same era, the same universe, so it can't be that excessively brilliant. It's just a different design ethos behind it. So let's have a look at the actual model itself now. So this is a sort of a special issue class of model, so it's kind of XLE sort of size from the Eaglemoss perspective. Old school styrofoam, as ever. I actually sold a loose one of these and discovered in the process that its nacelles are a little bit wobbly, but they can be replaced quite easily. So it's not actually the first time I've seen it. But as you can see, it's very detailed. There's some really nice detailing on the top side there, but this is this negative space I was talking about. There just isn't anything there. In fact, there's more negative space here and here that I haven't noticed before, which is obviously a holdover from those early designs, because they still felt it was a good look. but it is, overwhelmingly a sort of a dark grey. We can see the bridge there, and again, it's, if you're going to design a really heavily armoured ship, why do you still make the bridge a really obvious point to shoot at? Why don't you bury it as deeply into the overall structure of the ship as you can, and leave the enemy guessing as to where it is? Answers on a postcard. In the magazine they were talking about sort of visibility, but visibility is pointless in space battles. You won't be able to see what you're shooting at most of the time anyway. You're going to be reliant on sensors. So it isn't a visual visibility that's important. It's your sensor package and your ability to still see monitors and screens that's important. So I get that, visually speaking, and in terms of what people are used to seeing on a Federation starship, that's where the bridge should be. But this is not supposed to be a typical Federation starship. So we've got the phaser drone balls of death there, as they were called, apparently. They also had torpedoes in them as well. So the idea was they would triangulate fire, which is clever if you want to put maximum pressure on the enemy's shields, because you're hitting it from more than one angle. So the shielded navigational deflector is just there. So it's got fair dues to them. It's got all the sort of detail in there. And what I've always liked about these models as well is that you can't ever see any screws or any sort of connection join points like that. I assume it's because they're largely glued together. But it's a good ship to hold. It holds well. I think there's metal in the saucer section definitely, but I know from experience that these are plastic and are just sort of held on there, and it's just that can be a little bit tenuous, it seems. But overall, it's a good size. If you wanted to swoosh it, you could definitely. Let's see if we can get it on the stand now. I didn't notice where it was supposed to be held onto, but as you'll appreciate by now, that is not uncommon for me, and I will just make it up as I go along. Let's have a look. So I would imagine, given that the shape of this, it's a over the secondary hull and onto the saucer section job, as it tends to be with these things. So there she is. Yeah. So because it looks like a traditional Federation starship, I do like it. There's no two ways about it. I may disagree slightly with some of the sort of the thinking around it, particularly with the negative space, because that never made any sense to me. But nevertheless, the way in which it's been reined back to make it just look more traditional obviously appeals to me because of my age. But I don't know that anyone would really have understood it if it was really sort of out there. And I think it's an interesting design issue these days, I suppose, in a sense, in that the CG programs are so powerful and the 3D printing is so powerful as well, I guess, also, that you can come up with basically anything you can imagine. But the question is, does that then actually work in real life conceptually? Because I think, not it wouldn't bother every member of the audience, I know, but, it's kind of, surely it's got to kind of hang together logically, otherwise people just can't suspend their disbelief, and I get that's one of the issues I had with Discovery, I suppose. There were just sometimes when it just broke for me, because I just thought, no, that's just no, but anyway, I will leave it there because that's been quite a long one already. But I hope that's been of use to you if you're looking to track one of these down. For completion, if nothing else, or indeed if you're just a sort of slightly younger generation and this for you was one of those cool ships that you really want to get hold of, which I completely get, because it's nasty. It's nasty. All right then, cheers for now.